can speak on behalf of Harsh to say that we're most delighted to be here this morning and walking through your campus. We're a little envious, jealous. We wish to take a break from work at some point and go back to school like you. But Harsh, thank you for coming all the way from India for a day for this. And it's always more interesting to do these things in person. So I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thanks for having me.
This $1 trillion digital economy thing, it was perhaps only a mirage even a couple of years ago, let alone in 2008 when actually
Recording in progress.
India had prohibitively high data costs, very low rate and scale of bandwidth penetration. The kind of telecom boom we've seen in India was only a reality post, I think 2013, 14. We had like 13 telecom operators, I think, in 2008 vying for consumer spend. And it was quite a fragmented ecosystem with the concomitant challenges around infrastructure, particularly at the last mile. And somehow in this environment, and also around the time this global financial crisis occurred, many of you may not know that Dream 11, although it is India's first profitable gaming unicorn, it actually started way back in 2008. So I think I'd first like to throw this open to you, Harsh, with a very sort of sweeping question, which is what were you thinking in 2008 to even enter this segment? Digital applications have, of course, prospered and grown since 2014, 2013. But in 2008, it seemed like a crazy idea to get into a space like this where you had to really create the market. So over to you, Harsh.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. To what you started off with, I was also walking through this whole Spangler place, and I was at CBS 10 years ago, and I was remembering that, and I was like, damn, I miss this life. And so just enjoy it. But yeah, so in 2008 we weren't thinking. We weren't thinking when we started this gaming startup. So I, just to backtrack a bit, I'm a Bombay boy, so born and brought up in Mumbai. And I was a big Manchester United fan. Any football fans here? Man U fans? Eric Ten Hag, 2-0 today. Oh no. Everyone makes mistakes, it's okay. We were like die-hard Man U fans, me and some of my friends. And I went to London for high school. And that's when in 2001, I fell in love, I got introduced and fell in love with this thing called Fantasy Premier League. By the way, anyone here playing FPL? No? Fantasies? Okay, we got a few people here. So FPL was my life. That's the way I kept in touch with all my friends back home. And then I went to UPenn for engineering, 6 years abroad, kept in touch with all my boys back home. We had this league, and that was like really a lot of banter and fun. Then in 2007, I went back after UPenn engineering to work in the family company like a good Marwari boy, from a business family. And but I was itching to do something of my own. And my dad was working on this like 10, 15-year long projects, not the most exciting thing for a 22-year-old engineer. And a little league that you might have heard of was starting up called the Indian Premier League. There was this experiment to make cricket into a league for the first time. And so I went looking for fantasy cricket, and there was none. And I was like, this is crazy. Everyone knows fantasy sports in the US. Today there's a small match happening this evening of a game which is not played with a foot or a ball. But so football, honestly, that time was my life. And when I went to play fantasy cricket, it didn't exist. So we didn't think. We just said that, look, this is something we're so passionate about. And there's 1 billion Indian cricket fans. And fantasy sports is huge worldwide. We just jumped into it. We went and met all the gaming entrepreneurs in 2007-8. We went and spoke to a bunch of people about the idea, and they all unequivocally told us what a bad idea this was, and to just go back to the family business. And we launched anyways, right? We just said, no, nahi, karna hai, like we have to do this. And we launched, and then 2 years later, we learned they were right. It was a terrible idea. So we raised about $1 million, from friends and family to start off with a seed funding, and burned through it in 2 years, zero revenue. And we had started as a free-to-play, ad-driven, season-long fantasy sports model. That's the one that we saw on CBS, Yahoo, ESPN at that time. And that just failed miserably. So we ended up in 2010 started a digital agency. Because Facebook, when we started out, I know I'm going to date us, but when we started out, Orkut was the biggest social network in India. That's when we started out. And Steve Jobs had just launched something new called the iPhone. Right, so 13 telecom operators and all that. And then, we ran out of money, launched a digital media agency, became one of India's largest social media agencies. And that's the money we kept making on the side, on the servicing side. It was a side hustle which became a primary thing that we're doing. And Dream 11 became a side hustle. And we kept the dream alive with that money. And in 2012, we finally, like 4.5 years later, we finally pivoted and found the model that you see today. So yeah.
Fascinating, and just to pick up on a couple of things you've said, and I think we had some discussions with some people in the room about this yesterday as well, which is, of course, how do you value failure? Clearly you failed, as you mentioned, and how do you put a value to it in relative to how you value success as a learning opportunity? But also, I think this gestation period that you saw of multiple years of failure, up and down, perhaps no profitability, of course, par for the course. What kind of advice do you have for folks who are perhaps not necessarily at the start of their careers, maybe a lot of mid-career folks here, to think about the entrepreneurial journey, to think about risk-taking, when your metrics change quite quickly in your, as you transcend from your 20s to your 30s. Is there anything that we can extrapolate from your journey that is perhaps transferable to another demographic?
Sure. So I think, first of all, I know this is Harvard, and I'm speaking to a bunch of A+ people here. But the first thing is that grades don't matter, right? For us, real world experiences matter. For us, the learnings matter. Honestly, success has many fathers and failures and often. But failure is the only thing that teaches us. Somewhere along this whole education journey, we forget that, right? You learn to run by falling. You learn to walk by falling, actually. You learn to swim by almost drowning. You learn everything in life by failing. But somehow we go into education, and the whole educational system teaches us that failure is like a, black mark on society. And I think that failing is the only way you truly learn. It's just that we have to learn not to fail at the same thing again and again and again. You have to keep learning from that failure and moving on. I think it was Edison, right, who said that I didn't learn how to create a bulb, like a light bulb. I just failed 1,000 times, and that's how I succeeded. And so my point is that, for us at Dream 11, we actually value failed entrepreneurs as the best people to hire even. That's by far the best people that you can hire, because they've had the courage to start something on their own, they've had the courage to fail, and they've learned from it. To answer your other question, I think that in India, right now, is one of the best times that you'll ever have. And I know this theme will keep recurring in all these talks, but with the whole per capita GDP crossing that $4,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 mark. But generally in India, all of you, I would strongly encourage, I've been seeing this over the last 10 years, right? When I went to CBS, The goal of most, even the Indians there, was to get employed by FANG, right? Like one of the FANG companies in the US. And now it's amazing to see so many of y'all wanting to come back home. The whole world, every like American, European company I'm talking to needs to have an India strategy. To the point where, Indian CEOs are actually leading most of the top companies in the world now. And it's more important than ever for all of you Indians to actually come home and help build India, but also take advantage of this amazing ride for the next 10, 15, 20 years that India is going to go through. There's like this growth story happening in India, which is in relative terms better than anywhere else in the world. And we're seeing that and we're very excited about it.
So let's talk about the India market and trying to hack it.
Yeah.
It's the growth story is also a story of aggregates, right? So you're moving along 1.3 billion people with young demographics, and so at aggregate levels it seems to be very compelling. But when you actually try to break down, say, a product market fit or a product entry or distribution strategy, it doesn't seem quite as linear, and then you have to start thinking a little more deeply about distribution, for instance. And everyone knows here, in particular, the analogies to the shampoo packets costing 1 rupee and changing the paradigm for FMCG, in the late 80s and so on and so forth. But now, as a consequence, everyone is trying that sort of unique unit economics, I would say, in the digital market in India, where you're trying to reach the last mile, tier 2, tier 3 cities, and therefore there is also a level of hyper competition for those same eyeballs or consumers. And at the same time, distributional challenges still persist, because until you are distributing at scale, it's very hard to create billion or $8 billion companies like you have. There are a few sort of super premium luxury companies, etc., that may emerge. But if all things considered, it seems that a lot of the 108, 120 unicorns that have emerged in India, a significant share, have done so by actually being able to distribute their products widely, make them accessible, and so on and so forth. Which is also a challenge for unit economics, because again, you have to look at the aggregate versus your target market, and you have to build value at the same time. So how do you hack this?
Yeah, so when we started out our unit economics clearly did not work, right? Those first 4 years when we really crashed and burned. And that's when we understood the value of looking at gross margins, contribution margins, and understanding that in pure tech companies, right, you truly should see your marketing costs, your operating costs stay linear, whereas your revenues need to grow exponentially. And that is possible. Tech is one of the only places where that is clearly possible in most tech companies. And that's something that we really focused on, that do our customer lifetime value, is it large enough where our payback periods are within a year and our retention is really high. So a lot of times people struggle with product market fit, right? What is PMF? How do you define PMF? It's very hard. I think that we define PMF by saying that, is it growing adoption with very high retention, right? Now that can't be incentivized. You can't give someone $1 and tell him to pay you 50 cents and say, oh, we're winning, right? So there's a lot of that stuff also happening, which is, faking the whole unit economics. So you've got to be real about it. But I think that overall, the focus has to be on solving a problem. There's too many people who jump into entrepreneurship, I think, saying that there's an opportunity, and so I'm going to jump in. I think every entrepreneurial opportunity has its highs and lows. And if you don't go to sleep dying to start something out, if you don't wake up dying to get started on that, and if you don't hate the rest of your day because you haven't yet started it, I would strongly suggest don't jump into it.
So,
right? It has to be super passionate.
Just to continue on that for a minute more, is there an element of virality to digital products in general, which could encompass services and so on,
Yeah.
which is serendipitous, or do you believe that virality is always by design? So again, to come back to the same question, how hard do you have to think about designing a product that actually, as you said, the retention is is high, and there is a sort of a mass appeal to it, and you outdo your marketing dollars. Is there a way to think about it scientifically? It's almost like trying to think about how to make a piece of YouTube content viral.
Correct. You can be a catalyst to virality. You can't, if your product isn't inherently viral or social, then you can't make it so by like coding it into the platform, right? I mean, everyone knows about ChatGPT. There is no virality in ChatGPT, but it's the fastest product ever in the history of mankind to cross 100 million users. There's no like social feature, there's no share button, there's nothing there, right? Good products that solve problems for people will always be inherently viral because you want to tell your friends about it. Fantasy sports just happens to be one of the best examples of that because it has true network effects. It gets better as you get your friends and others to play with you, right? So that's a true network effect driven game, and that creates a huge competitive moat for a first mover advantage like us. But I think India, to answer your earlier question, in India, if you want to grow in India, the likelihood is that you don't create a very premium product. But our competitive advantage is that we have 500 million ready consumers online to tap into. So for example, in fantasy sports, when we had started out, we had kept the ticket sizes very high. And we learned that the way to grow was to actually keep it really low and fun and engaging. So we keep talking about how fantasy sports is actually popcorn to your movie. It's not supposed to be played on itself, right? Like if you have snacks outside, you'll have chips and you'll have, nuts and cashews and whatever, but you won't have popcorn. But if you got to go for a movie, you got to get some popcorn, right? It's going to make your movie much more fun. And fantasy sports is that for sports. And so we made sure that our version of fantasy sports, our average ticket size is like 40 rupees. It's half a dollar. And more than 50% of people win their money back. So it's a very long tail, gratifying, instant gratification, short attention spans. Like you said about the shampoo bottle, we started with a season-long fantasy where we've got to manage a team for a whole season. And that crashed and burned. But then we got it down to a match. We said today's match, just make your team for that game. That's it. And no commitment, just one match, and suddenly things started looking up. So sometimes your idea is right, but your model is wrong, and you've got to keep tweaking and pivoting till you find it.
So, since you mentioned ChatGPT 3, how does technology itself disrupt businesses like yours, and how do you prepare for it? I mean, you certainly are not resting on your laurels, given that you've come here for one day.
No, not at all. I think it's great that technology is the final enabler for all disruption, right? And we believe that even fantasy sports in our Web 2 will get disrupted by Web 3 fantasy. And so we've already invested in NFT fantasy sports. So there's this company called Rario, where we've invested $100 million because we believe that NFTs in sports will lead to utilities that will create fantasy sports where you don't even have to put money, right? So the whole real money gaming loop ends because you buy assets which are non-fungible tokens, right? And you buy these NFTs, and then you can just play for free from the money collected from those primary sales. And so we're trying to make sure that we are part of that cannibalization journey for Dream 11 as well, before someone else does. I think some examples of that is like Apple's done it really well. They had the personal computing to start off with. Then they kind of cannibalized that with the iPhone itself, right? They said, now we're going to give you a computer in your pocket. And then they cannibalized it further by having something in between both of those called the iPad. And so they just keep cannibalizing themselves, but accept that the market keeps growing.
So is there value in actually waiting for a first mover to go ahead and, crash and burn and then do it better in markets where, you have to also get the users or consumers used to the product. So Web3, I don't know how many of us are collectively aware here around the dynamics of Web3, but obviously it's a decentralized future version of the internet where everyone has more agency. But at the same time, when you talk to folks in India today, developers in the Web3 space, it seems that India is ripe with opportunities for developers to take up Web3 work, but not necessarily for user adoption in Web3, given the complexities around Web3. Therefore, do you feel like if folks here are contemplating coming back and building Web3 applications, they should perhaps wait for others to go and forge the path for user adoption and then learn from that, or it's worth getting your fingers burnt and trying yourself?
It's always better to just jump in if you're really passionate about something. Like I said, fantasy sports makes no sense to launch in India. No, like if you went to Bain, McKinsey, BCG, everyone with your frameworks in your classes of those SWOT analysis and all of that stuff, all of that great stuff you learn in school is pretty useless in the real world. But it's great to have that as a consultant, but as an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs are successful because they do something that everyone thinks is going to fail otherwise. Right? I mean, who thought that you move from like having taxis to getting in the back of some random person's car, right? Who thought that you'd end up sleeping in some random person's home on a mattress?
So Harsh,
right?
who gives you a reality check? I mean,
the market, the users.
Okay.
Every time you do something wrong, data will give you a reality check. Users are not there to stand for anything except value to them. And so even with Web3, right? There's a lot of people that go into it saying that, oh, it's Web3, NFTs, crypto, this, that. People don't actually care. Nobody cared about Web2, right? Facebook didn't go around saying that, oh, there's something called Web2 now. We came to know there was a Web2 only when Web3 launched. Yes. Till then, the world didn't even know there was a Web2, right? So the whole point is that for Web3, even for what we're doing with NFTs, we don't even talk to users about NFTs. We talk to them about what's the problem we're solving for them. We tell them about this new concept of having access to an asset which you can buy, like a club membership. And when you get into that club, there's a whole bunch of like utilities and games that you can play for free and win prizes. That's it. So you can't talk to them about Web3, tokens, blockchain, non-fungible stuff, fungible stuff. You can't talk about any of that. You've got to break it down to the user and say, what's the value I'm adding to your life? And all the other good stuff can be saved for your debt to VCs.
So on this point again, out of the 100-odd unicorns and the many more soonicorns and so on and so forth, it seems to be the case that India, or digital businesses and entrepreneurs in India, are succeeding in specialized segments. They may not be Web3, but specialized SaaS, online gaming, even regional social media. These are specialized segments and not necessarily directly competing with platforms which have multiple layers of services built in, which are sometimes interoperable, sometimes closed loop. I'm talking obviously about the Googles, and even Facebook, Metas, and Microsofts of the world. So does, at some point, Web3 help reconcile this in a way that it helps Indian specialized businesses also platformize, or do we continue to rely on sort of larger tech platform ecosystems? And what kind of, how do we sort of account for resilience in that ecosystem if that is the case?
So I think that, Google Play Store obviously gives you phenomenal reach and distribution. And now with all the antitrust cases, etc., Play Store is looking like it might lower its commissions as well, which enables entrepreneurs to succeed even further. The distribution is just phenomenal. We just got onto the Play Store now, actually. So we built a 150 million user platform, but Play Store hadn't allowed any real money games in India. So we had to get users used to downloading an APK on their Android phones. And Apple, which is usually like the tougher nut to crack, allowed fantasy sports on in India, but unfortunately Apple accounts for like less than 5% market share in India by phone penetration. So I think that all big tech have created this, these tailwinds for everyone to jump into and use. We have the greatest competitive advantage in the world as Indians, going back to an Indian market, with a government that's looking to create a $1 trillion digital economy, that's creating regulations and not banning things anymore. They're regulating things. They're making sure that we look at the future, we look at the world, and we allow Indian entrepreneurs to succeed. We're making in India. I mean, like Atmanirbhar Bharat, right, is a great example. Like Dream 11 is literally one example where we're made by Indians in India for Indians. I put out this tweet recently that we just saw, like, we just happened to check it out and we saw, oh, we're the top 8th most downloaded game in the world this year till now, and we're only available in India. We're not even available on other Play Stores or App Stores. So that's the power of India. Our scale is our competitive advantage. Our ability to deal with organized chaos is our competitive advantage. Like in India, try driving on the roads, right? I mean, there's barely any accidents, but everyone, to the outside world, it looks like you're about to die any given point of time, but we're like, there's no problem at all. This is completely fine. And that's a little bit like the market in India, right? As an entrepreneur, there's so many flip-flops, but that's our competitive advantage. Foreign companies, I mean, I asked this of a few HBS students yesterday. Can you think of many foreign companies that have a very large, meaningful presence in India as compared to their global revenues, and have disrupted something in India? Well, no, Amazon, but no, it doesn't have Amazon India's revenues are not very sizable to its global revenues. But yes, it's barely any, right? And that's our competitive advantage. We can deal with that and just keep moving on.
So on the regulation question, now there is some semblance of a regulatory framework being evolved in India around your sector. But the cynics among us may say that you are already a large business, I mean, you are the equivalent of big tech in gaming, in the specialized market that is gaming.
Is that a compliment or an insult? We'll find out later.
We'll find out. So, it's in your interest to build barriers to market entry through regulation, in a sense. Once you have reached escape velocity and you've garnered that consumption base and so on and so forth. So how do you respond to that, if, let's say, it's not a compliment and one accuses you of actually proactively going and prodding the tiger to regulate you or to eat others alive or whatever it is?
Yeah. No, so two parts. One is that when you're growing a startup, right, you're literally just every day looking to survive. That's it. You don't have time to actually speak to the government about regulations because you're not even sure your business will last, right? Once you have a stable business model, then what you need is long-term stability in the sector. And that's what we've seen, that once we became a unicorn, about 4 years ago, we needed more stability because now this value is very real. And now we're no longer dying every day and just trying to survive. We want to thrive. And obviously that's when we go to the government. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been pushing to create regulations in the space to open up the entire gaming ecosystem in India. I think our Honorable PM has led with that last year. In last year's budget, he said India can become a gaming superpower and we want to enable that. And that was music to our ears. And now we've had the Digital India Act coming up with our Honorable Minister Ashwini Vaishnav and our Honorable Minister of State Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Both of them are doing such a phenomenal job in getting a Digital India Act that will enable gaming and the entire digital ecosystem in India. Regulating it the right way, but working on that safe, open, accountable, trusted internet to make sure that innovation is still at the core. So even with gaming, the draft regulations that came out make sure that innovation is still at the core and it doesn't just create these barriers to entry and help the incumbents. But by doing so, we're making sure that in the last 5 years, about $2 billion of FDI have come into just the gaming sector in India. We, for out of 15 years, 10 years, there was one company in India that did fantasy sports really. That was us. In the last 5 years, there's now 250 companies that do fantasy sports. Fun fact, we have about 5 or 6 of them that we found that was such copy pastes of us that they put our customer care number on their on the platform. So we used to get calls. And we used to say that, sorry, please contact them. But that's how easy it is to launch things digitally, right? You need one kid with a laptop in school to be able to launch an entire digital company by themselves. And that's the beauty of the internet, and that's what I think the Digital India Act is going to allow. Yes, it will provide clarity and stability to the sector, which will help the incumbents. But no, I don't believe they're building any walls, quite the opposite. They're breaking down the walls and making innovation much faster. In India, 10 years ago when we went fundraising, there were 5 VCs. Today there's a plethora of VCs in the...
You are yourself a VC.
Yeah, that's right. Now we have a fund, but there's a seed stage, there's a pre-series A, there's a bridge to series A, there's a series A, and then there's 6 rounds of funding before you get to series B, right? And but that ecosystem is thriving.
I think a lot of us would be interested to know from your perspective on both sides of the market as a business operator and as a VC. How exactly this next couple of years pans out, given obviously the liquidity squeeze will impact the kind of businesses that are funded or the kinds of funds that are available. What is your advice to folks entering the market now? Of course, one is hearing that this is a good time to build, especially from folks in Web3. But as you scan the horizon on both sides, do you feel there are some opportunities that we may be missing as a result of maybe thinking too narrowly about the kinds of funds available? Or how does one really navigate the next 3-4 year sort of bearish cycle where we seem to be in a slow grind rather than a precipitous recession?
Yeah, so I think first of all there's a lot of timing and luck that goes into building large companies. There's just no two ways about it, right? The internet is filled with great products, wrong time. And sometimes filled with okay products and right time, which do well and then figure out the product later. And I think kudos to all of you all for getting that right. You're at HBS at the best time. You don't have to be out there getting a job right now. But these are cycles, right? And I think that the amount of money that VCs and private equity funds are sitting on to put into tech, there's just so much dry powder in the ecosystem that I can pretty much guarantee you that by mid this year or end of this year, there is going to be that optimism in investing coming back. I can see today at the early stage already starting out. And so you guys are going to get out into a market which is just beginning of a boom cycle again. And these things happen every 4 years, right? It was 2008, 2012, 2016, and then instead of happening in 2020, there was a slightly larger cataclysmic event that happened then with COVID. It just got pushed out by 2 years and happened in 2022. And I believe first will be fear followed by greed, and then there'll be fear again. So I think 2026, 27, again you'll see this same cycle repeating itself. But this will be a great time to go out and build. Because as you get out and if you try to start something, you're not under pressure. I think a year and a half ago, every entrepreneur I spoke to was saying, we're starting something, and then how long will it take me to become a unicorn? And I was like, if that's why you're starting, just please don't start, right? Because anything that you want to do, I think you should be able to commit 5 years to it. If you're not willing to commit 5 years, you're not going to get it right in year one. You're going to pivot, you're going to learn, you're going to grow into it. If you try to put in sense into starting up, most of the times it's not going to work out. Right? It has to still be, I think the main parts about starting up is large addressable market, large TAM, right? A really important problem you're solving for users, adding value to their lives, and a good team of people who are very passionate and truly like want to fix it. That's it. Contrary to what people believe, VCs aren't even looking at your 5-year business plans when you start out, because 99% of businesses will pivot and adapt and change their business plans as they start out. So I think those 3 components are the only ones that matter when you're really looking to start.
Last couple of questions from me, and then we can turn it to the audience, Harsh. I think an important component of doing business in India, in the traditional days of, the Tatas and Birlas, you saw one conception of responsible business and what it means to be a responsible business in a country which, while it's the 5th largest economy in the world and so on and so forth, there are a range of inequities that persist. Users are perhaps not as informed, and there are risks that emanate from that, and there are specific risks in the digital space that link to that. All of a sudden we see in the policy space, policymakers also pivoting from looking at the 800 million people who are online and consuming broadband as a big opportunity for growth, to also worrying now about the social, political, cultural, economic implications of something happening at one part of the digital ecosystem impacting fortunes of other people in another, including political fortunes, and you see that surface area of risk has grown in a sense for politicians and policymakers. So in that context, plus in the sort of legacy context of what it has meant to be a responsible business in India, how do you as a digital market operator look at it? Are there ways in which you are making your unique contributions to this space? How do you wish for entrepreneurs from here to emerge and also contribute?
Look, I think it's a good question about how do we also help India, right? The government is pushing with Digital India. It's enabling us to start up. It's making starting up in India. When we started up 15 years ago, it took us about like 6 months to get our bank account set up and certificate of incorporation. Today that happens almost instantly. It's become so much easier. You have the cloud, you have AWS, GCP, Azure, you have so many ways to just start up. Earlier when we started up, you needed actually physical servers, right? You needed a server room kept at like 5 degrees, 10 degrees Celsius and an AC room. There were all these constraints of starting up. It wasn't cool to start up that time. It was like, you're crazy to start up. Go find a job instead. I think today it's amazing to have such an easy way to start up, and you must take advantage of it. And when you do so, I think like for us, now that we've got into this place, we are trying to contribute to nation building from our side. Now, once we grew Dream 11 from 0 to $1 billion, and we had a product that worked, and we had revenues and we were profitable, we now have 10 companies in our portfolio. So we have sports content, sports commerce, NFT sports, esports, sneakers, fitness community, we have a fintech platform, we have sports coaching. So we have 10 companies that we now run on Dream 11 with Dream 11 as a Dream Sports group. One of them also is Dream Sports Foundation, where we give back. To answer your question, we actually take care of 7,000 athletes in India, which have won 150 medals for the country. And this is our way of giving back to sports in India. I think every company, as we are growing, is trying to give back. Like I said earlier, from one company, there are now 250 companies in fantasy sports, which are employing tens of thousands of people and adding value to the ecosystem. The gaming ecosystem in India now pays $1 billion of tax. So all of this is like a great, it's an economy, right? So the companies, the entrepreneurs that set up companies that grow, create jobs, create taxes, and then hopefully give back a lot in CSR. And I think that fuels the government to create more entrepreneurship opportunities.
The last question from me, Harsh. Out of the 110, 120 unicorns, maybe about half of them are domiciled abroad. And interestingly, over the last year or so, we've seen, of course, PhonePe has come back and decided to pay $1 billion in taxes in exchange for doing so over the last month or so. But there are several others who want to now re-domicile or be able to list in India. So I want to ask you both questions. Why now are people wanting to come back? There are at least 20 or 30 companies that we are in touch with who are exploring that prospect, and in fact in the union budget there were also indications that the government is aware of this phenomenon of wanting to re-domicile. Nothing significantly has changed in the tax structure or the incentives of the Ministry of Finance to maximize revenues over promoting innovation. But there is this meta trend at play, and at the same time, why did you first domicile abroad in the first place if this was the sort of full circle that one had to draw?
No, great question. I think when we started, I think it's about time. Every company that's starting out in India, every entrepreneur that's starting out in India today, I strongly encourage them to start up in India, right? Domicile in India, build for India. But when we started out, we were an Indian company to really start off with in the first 4-5 years where we failed, we crashed and burned. But then when we started, it started picking up as we pivoted. We went looking to raise money. And after 3 years of, by the way, it took us about 3 years of fundraising to actually get our first Series A investor in. And at that time, the laws were pretty archaic in India, right? About VC investing. There wasn't like a VC investing law. There was very little language that protected VCs at that time. And a couple of them had some bad instances with Bazi, if anyone knows about that. So they're very scared of investing in Indian companies because of the kind of fiduciary responsibilities and obligations of directors in India at that time. This is speaking a decade ago. And so many unicorns you see today are the outcome of a decade of work. And so they had all domiciled abroad just like us to allow VCs to put money in that time. Because VCs wanted protection personally, and so they wanted to be directors of a foreign company. Today that's changed. That's no longer the case. So I would strongly recommend, if I had a choice today, 100% we would be an Indian company only. And we hope to work with the government at some level, that I'm sure the government is now aware of this, but most unicorns want to move back to India and re-domicile like PhonePe. I think Sameer has done a great job. Sameer Nigam has done a great job of re-domiciling and showing us the way. And we love to follow that example in some time. We've also seen the Indian public markets are now open to tech companies, and that's been a big boon. Even though there have been some ups and downs, the fact that now we have stability for Nykaa, for Zomato, for Paytm, for Policy Bazaar, and if I'm forgetting maybe one or two more. This is great news for India. So that's why we want to be back in India now.
Yeah, I think all of us in the retail investing space want a piece of the pie, and I think there is scarcity in this market for good quality tech companies, and I think that's probably an incentive for several companies to be back here. I see a lot of hands. I don't know how we should go about this, but maybe we go from the front to the back. And if we can just do quick introductions and quick questions instead of long comments, because we have very little time and a lot of questions. Is there a mic here? Otherwise, we can start there, please.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. My name is Sanjeev Tripathi, and I'm running a couple of IT organizations based in Boston, 28 years here. Now I'm spending a lot more time back in India. So my question is, I'm right now in the process of creating digital jobs in Tier 2 and Tier 3 and small towns. So what are the areas or what sort of training and opportunities you can think of, particularly for women, the educated women to work from home? So I need some.
Maybe we can take a couple more, Harsh, and then come back on this if there may be similarly themed questions. But
sure.
Yeah,
Hi Harsh, I'm Vishal from Babson College doing my MBA in entrepreneurship. So my question is about, you're saying that all the people who are here starting organizations should come back to India. So as per the one of the news I've read today was from Economic Times, which says that 1.8 million students will actually contribute among almost 75 to 85 billion dollars in 2024 to study abroad, to go to different countries. And not just this, the opportunity, what I believe is the opportunity cost is way too high, because these students are going to create organizations, pay taxes in a different country.
Sure.
So how are you going to what is your message to them?
I think there is a commonality to these questions, in the sense that, at least to this gentleman's point, education is being appended by technology, and you're going to have. I mean, I personally feel like YouTube is the best edtech platform in the world. I use it every day to learn something new. So how does technology create new opportunities to reverse some of this brain drain? And I think also, how does the gender dimension play into some of this?
Sure. Look, I think it's great. You have these 2 million Indians coming abroad, getting exposure. I honestly believe more than classrooms, the exposure you get of traveling abroad, of living abroad, of seeing companies working here, of seeing mature tech running here, bringing that back home is the biggest learning. Not, finance 101 or accounting 101 or whatever it is, right? Now, we learn, that's very important to learn. You can learn that on YouTube as well, right? But I think the experience here that you all get is really what you can carry back to India. And that's the biggest part of these 2 million Indians, right? Like I said, I see most of them now looking forward to maybe doing short stints, if any, and then coming back home, because India has jobs, India has a growth market. You're a first-class citizen in India. It's your country. And you don't have to fight for an H-1B visa and then stand in line and wait here for hoping and praying one day. Yes, this is the land of the free, home of the brave, and all of that. It's been a great country. But for all of us, we need to be back home helping to build what is going to be the second largest economy in the world soon. And I think that's something we see with women, to your question, sir. Women form 50% of our population, right? I mean, it is the largest untapped resource we have. And historically, women have not been as big a part of the professional environment in India. And I think that's drastically changed in the last few years, at least in the tier 1 cities. And I hope that we can tap into the tier 2, tier 3 much, much more. Because that is literally like we have just by math, we have like 700 million women in India that need to be tapped into as a resource for really coming and boosting our entire ecosystem. They're critical components for jobs, for prosperity, for spending, for everything. And so upskilling them is a very big part of our success probability in the future.
Sure. Lots of hands. Well, you guys have to pick. So.
Okay, hi, my name is Amita Gandhi. I just graduated from Stanford CS from Hyderabad. My question for Harsh was, there's tech push versus market pull, and it's quite evident you fall in the former category back in 2008. So when you don't have these business school consulting frameworks to sort of build that conviction, how are you helping build your team to dream with you when you don't have those sort of conventional frameworks to back you?
Great question.
Yeah,
Maybe
you want me to
more?
just...
Okay. You can
I think the frameworks are great for professionals, right? Like, I think it's great because it gives you a framework. I'm a like Virgo and an org, like full org guy, right? So I like frameworks for helping me when I'm thinking, but in entrepreneurship, you can't have a framework. If frameworks were great for entrepreneurship, you wouldn't have BCG, McKinsey and Bain and everyone. You just would have every single person from there going out there and starting a unicorn, right? They're great when you're consulting. They're great when you're thinking, when you're investing. But I think for entrepreneurship, you can't have a framework. You just have to find a large problem that you are super passionate to solve and that adds value to people's lives. That's literally it.
Hello. Hi Harsh. My name is Arjun. I'm working on some e-commerce startup ideas. So my question to you is about marketing, because Dream 11 undoubtedly is one of the best like ads I've ever seen. So what do you suggest for somebody who's starting up? Like, what are your insights on working with the traditional ad agencies versus like micro influencers who are just booming all the way? And for somebody who doesn't have deep pockets.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, our marketing budget began like 10 years after our journey, right? So you don't have money to market. Today, social media, influencers, they're great ways to market cheaply. But like as a startup, you have to focus on guerrilla marketing. And there's a lot of growth that's possible just by hustling, by being there on blogs, on forums, on social media, talking to influencers, getting them to move the needle. But ultimately, marketing can only it's a catalyst to a good product. You can market the hell out of a bad product and it's never going to get anywhere. But to answer your question, I think as a startup, you shouldn't be focused on marketing. You should be focused on product and on adding, like we spoke about earlier, features that create network effects. Features that make sure that it's better for your users to go out and spread the word.
Harsh, it's interesting, just last week Disney announced its quarterly earnings, and Bob Iger, who's back at the helm, said that he's cutting 500 million from marketing budget of Disney and focusing on the core product, which everyone knows. What are they spending so much on marketing for?
Yeah, I don't think they have a marketing budget for Mickey, right? Like Mickey Mouse just grew, and this whole like Marvel, DC, all of these, Marvel grew just by fan following. Today, yes, they have $1 billion and, every film gets $1 billion, they market the hell out of it. But your core product cannot be based on marketing.
Last question.
Hi Harsh.
We're going to be spending some time with Harsh after this at I think 1:30, and you can coordinate with Shruti on that in case there are many more.
Hi, I'm Uday. I manage the data analytics team for AWS. My question to you is, outside of Radio, which is a Web3 project you've invested in, which are some of the other Web3 projects you're bullish on?
There's very few right now that have grown to any kind of scale, right? I think, in fact, the true value of blockchain and Web3 is going to come out now. Like, I think there's a lot of real world examples. Like, I am very excited personally about blockchain ticketing. I think blockchain ticketing will lead to a lot of, solve a lot of problems in the ticketing business. I think on real estate, blockchain is going to help tremendously. Those are some of the use cases, but I think right now, I'm very happy that this whole crypto bubble hype has gone down so that people are focusing on solving real world problems and are not just playing past the pillow with some crypto. So, yeah.
Thank you, Harsh. We've managed to cover a lot of ground. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your time. And thank you to all of you for being patient listeners.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.